Channel 2 in Los Angeles.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Roger Mudd substituting for Walter Cronkite and Bruce Dunning in Tokyo. In Washington, Daniel Shore, Dan Rather, Bruce Morton, and Charles Kuralt on the road tonight in Kansas.
Good evening. The Senate's investigation of Watergate moved a step closer to the White House Oval Office today as former presidential advisor John Ehrlichman began what will be at least 3 days of testimony. It became obvious quickly the committee will not have an easy time with him. Daniel Shore reports.
Ehrlichman figured prominently in charges before the committee as the one who managed the plumber's operation, had a wiretap file hidden, got acting FBI Director Gray to destroy evidence, tried to use the CIA to limit the Watergate investigation, induced Herbert Kalmbach to raise hush money. Many of those charges came from John Dean, and Ehrlichman's opening statement attacked Dean.
I welcome this opportunity to lay out the facts and publicly set the record straight on a number of questions. Some of these questions have been legitimately raised. Others are created by leaks to the press, falsehoods, and misunderstandings. I'm here to refute every charge of illegal conduct on my part, which has been made during the course of these hearings, including the material leaked to the news media. Mr. Dean began his statement with a somewhat superficial but gallery-pleasing repetition of the old story about fear and paranoia in the Nixon White House. Why, Mr. Dean wondered, was there all that overplayed concern about hippies coming to Washington to march peacefully down Pennsylvania Avenue? Mr. Dean's explanation is simply that we were all suffering from some advanced form of neurosis and nothing else, some strange White House madness. He suggests he was the only sane one in the bunch. From close observation, I can testify that the president is not paranoid, weird, psychotic on the subject of demonstrators, or hypersensitive to criticism. John Dean said one thing in his testimony, page 2929, falser than all the other falsehoods therein, when he said the Watergate, quote, was probably the major thing that was occurring at this point of time, meaning in the context of Senator Baker's question in the White House between June 17 and September 15, 1972. To demonstrate the absurdity of that important misstatement, I need only briefly develop a few facts which are perhaps a broader view of the months following June 17, 1972 than Mr. Dean is willing to take for his purposes. I do not suggest that we were all just too busy to have noticed. We did notice, and we kept informed through John Dean, among other sources, on the assumption that he was giving us complete and accurate information. It was a very busy time. John Dean, on the other hand, never found things so quiet, and he planned the most expensive honeymoon in the history of the White House staff right along in this period of time.
Ehrlichman acknowledged a White House concern with intelligence gathering, denied involvement with the abortive 1970 surveillance plan, but admitted responsibility for the 1971 plumbers operation after considerable sparring with committee counsel Sam Dash.
Were you assigned a role to create in the White House a capability for intelligence gathering at any time?
I don't know quite what you're getting at. If you're getting at the special unit and the problems of leaks.
I don't know why you have to find out what I'm getting at if you just answer my question as I ask it.
It's an obscure question to me.
No, it's a simple question. If the answer is no, say no. If the answer is yes, say yes.
In the attempt to plug leaks of government secrets, Ehrlichman admitted, wiretapping was used with authorization from President Nixon. He refused on security grounds to go into detail, but he said he did know of the so-called Kissinger taps of White House staff and newsmen.
Did you have any role in authorizing any other wiretaps?
From time to time, I did.
And in what area, could you tell us?
Well, now we're in this area that...
I'm not asking any specific taps. I'm asking for any specificity.
National security, generally national security objectives, and I'm under a stricture which really doesn't permit me to be very responsive to your question.
Ehrlichman confirmed that he had called off a planned firebombing of the Brookings Institution in search of missing papers, but said he didn't remember whom he called to call it off. A question about Charles Colson did not seem to refresh his memory. Ehrlichman also disputed John Mitchell's position that the major concern after the Watergate break-in was fear of the disclosure of the so-called White House horrors. Ehrlichman said he was not worried about Liddy and Hunt talking, and that he got reassurance from President Nixon about these security operations.
On the first occasion when I did discuss this with the President, which was in March of this year, he expressed essentially the view that I have just stated, that this was an important, a vital national security inquiry, and that he considered it to be well within the constitutional both obligation and function of the presidency.
This statute has only to do with the interception or disclosure of wire or oral communications prohibited.
No, sir, it also has to do with the Congress recognition of what the Constitution provides with relation to the powers of the president.
The foreign intelligence activities had nothing to do with the opinion of Ellsberg's psychiatrist about his intellectual or emotional or psychological state.
How do you know that, Mr. Chairman?
Because I can understand the English language as my mother tongue.
I think that basically you have to take this in context. We had here an unknown quantity in terms of a conspiracy. We had an overt act in the turning over of these secret documents to the Russian embassy. And moreover, we have a technique here in the development of a psychiatric profile, which apparently, in the opinion of the experts, is so valuable that the CIA maintains an entire psychiatric section for that purpose. Now, putting those all together, I submit that certainly there is in 2511 ample congressional recognition of the president's inherent constitutional powers to form a foundation for what I said to this committee.
I'm familiar with that statute. And there's not a syllable in there that says the president can suspend the Fourth Amendment or authorize burglary. It has no reference to burglary.
Ehrlichman earlier got into another hot dispute with Chairman Ervin over the Watergate payoff fund. A telephone call recorded by Ehrlichman indicated he had urged Herbert Kalmbach to raise the money when Kalmbach had doubts about it. But Ehrlichman insisted he did not know there was anything improper about the defense fund.
Mr. Ehrlichman, do I understand that you are testifying that the committee to re-elect the president and those associated with them constitute an eleemosynary institution that gave $450,000 to some burglars and their lawyers merely because they felt sorry for them?
While the committee grapples with Ehrlichman testimony it calls confusing, preparations are in progress for the constitutional confrontation. Assuming that the subpoena for tapes and documents is not met by Thursday, Chairman Ervin now plans to go first not to the courts but to the Senate for backing. That would mean a full Senate debate that one source calls, in effect, a pre-impeachment proceeding. Daniel Shaw, CBS News, at the Senate caucus room in Washington.
Tonight, CBS will broadcast a special report on Ehrlichman's testimony at 10 o'clock Eastern Time.
Enjoying our children and grandchildren is the best reason for staying on the young side, with sensible exercise and sensible eating. And breakfast is so important. I like to start ours with Product 19 cereal. It has all the officially established minimum daily adult requirements for vitamins and iron.
Yes, Grandpa.
She likes Grandpa riding better than horses.
Stay on the young side. Start breakfast with Kellogg's Product 19.
Today's the day for Scotch Liquid Gold. Dust is hard on wood, not to mention heat, sunlight, moisture, and kids. Liquid Gold restores and protects this faded-looking furniture. Scratches and blemishes seem to disappear, and Liquid Gold cleans off dirt, grease, water stains, even wax buildup. Liquid Gold is great for all kinds of wood, even redwood fences.
Scott's Liquid Gold. It's good for all kind of woods. There's nothing else like it. It's available in aerosol spray.
Watergate and the presidential tape recordings continued to be a major topic at the White House today, but President Nixon himself was seen to be busy with other matters. Dan Rather reports.
To hear the White House tell it, the president's mind today was more on diplomacy than subpoenas. The Shah of Iran and his wife arriving for a state visit. Russia's penetration into the Persian Gulf, the combined U.S.-Iranian military buildup to protect against that, and the whole Middle East problem dominated their talk.
It is significant to note that of all of the areas in the world which pose a potential threat to peace in the world, that Iran is in a very key central area. And what gives us a great deal of heart is that you have always stood for and stand for now a policy of contributing to the forces of peace and stability rather than to the forces of war and destruction.
We want to make it very clear once more that we will keep not only our past glories and histories, but our future with vigilance. We are not one of those countries who will surrender.
The president's meeting with the Shah in the Oval Office is believed to be the first time in 2 years that Mr. Nixon has met a foreign leader there without the conversation being secretly taped. As for the Senate subpoenas, aides to the president say he may have an answer tomorrow. Deputy Press Secretary Gerald Warren said today the tapes have not been edited. Warren declined to answer what he called the hypothetical question of what the president would do if the Supreme Court eventually rules he should release the tapes. Dan Rather, CBS News, Washington.
A federal judge in Washington today ordered the Finance Committee to re-elect the president to disclose the names of the people who last year made anonymous campaign contributions totaling $14 million. District Judge Joseph Wade also ordered the committee to tell how the money was spent. A court in Costa Rica today made a final ruling that Robert Vesco cannot be extradited to the United States. The New Jersey financier has been living in Costa Rica since May, when he was indicted along with John Mitchell and Maurice Stans for an illegal contribution to the president's re-election campaign.
Polaroid's new SX70. Just touch the button. Now these pictures, developing themselves outside the camera, are hard and dry. Minutes later, you have finished photographs seemingly as real as life itself. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid.
When you have athlete's foot, you're always sneaking a scratch, 'cause it itches. It's a fungus that makes a crack in the skin, and it's hard to get at. Use NP27. It has a fungicide to kill the fungus, and then help keep it from coming back. NP27 feels real nice on your feet, and when that itch finally stops, it's a real pleasure.
Republican National Chairman George Bush leveled some dirty tricks charges at the Democrats today. He told a news conference he had 3 affidavits purporting to show that the late Robert Kennedy coordinated spying on Richard Nixon's 1960 campaign, and that the spy reports were given to a Kennedy aide, Carmine Bellino, now on the staff of the Watergate Committee. Bruce Morton has a report.
One affidavit from the late John Leon said Bellino ordered physical surveillance of Ab Herman in 1960, the executive assistant to the Republican national chairman. And it contained hearsay about bugging. But the man it named as Master Bugger, Edward Jones, denied any electronic snooping in his affidavit, though admitting 2 old-fashioned surveillance missions. Follow that man. The third affidavit simply said that a 4th party claiming to work for Bellino had requested help in bugging the hotel rooms where Richard Nixon was preparing for his TV debates with John Kennedy. The request denied. Bush said the charges were sensational and should be investigated.
I cannot and I do not vouch for the veracity of the statements that are given under oath that are contained in these affidavits. But I do believe that this matter is serious enough to to concern the Senate Watergate Committee, and particularly since its chief investigator is the subject of the charges contained in the affidavits. Now, some is going to say that in releasing this information that I'm trying to justify Watergate. This simply isn't true.
Bellino, the Watergate Committee's chief investigator, appeared outside the hearing room to deny the charges.
Yeah, I have read the charges about me made by George Bush and the affidavits attached to his statement. The charges are absolutely false. I categorically and unequivocally deny that I have ever ordered, requested, directed, or participated in any electronic surveillance whatsoever in connection with any political campaign.
But under questioning, Bellino said he did undertake one straight surveillance mission, trying to tail a former Republican congressman he thought was involved in anti-Catholic, anti-Kennedy activity. But Bellino said, we lost him at the airport. Otherwise, he added, Bush's charges were an effort to distract attention from the Watergate investigation. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
A Midwest grocery chain executive...
You're left with...
Yes, in these studies on two kinds of pain other than headache, Excedrin was significantly more effective than common aspirin. Excedrin, the extra-strength pain reliever.
The San Diego Zoo is your best family entertainment value. Adults $1.50, children under 16 free. There's fun and entertainment at the San Diego Zoo. See the free seal shows where California's sea lions splash and cavort. See the free gorilla shows starring Ramar the gorilla. Ramar's delightful antics will be seen daily from July 21st to the 29th. Visit the San Diego Zoo. Adults $1.50, children under 16 free. Free parking.
Pick up Plymouth.
Clean up time.
Pick up price.
Clean up prices.
Pick a winner.
You're way ahead.
Here's a penny pinch and clean up price.
The big news continues now from New York on KNXT Channel 2.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Roger Mudd substituting for Walter Cronkite, and Bert Quint in Benghazi, Libya, Peter Kalischer in Paris, David Henderson in New York, in Washington, Daniel Shore, Dan Rather, Bob Schieffer, and Marvin Kell.
Good evening. Hampered by long and time-consuming roll calls, 9 of them on the Senate floor, the Watergate Committee today had a tough time getting down to the nitty-gritty with John Ehrlichman. Daniel Shore reports from Capitol Hill.
At the outset, Ehrlichman's lawyer, John Wilson, turned witness to argue the president's right to authorize illegal entry, as in the case of Daniel Ellsberg, psychiatrist, in pursuit of foreign spies. Chairman Ervin scoffed at the idea that the psychiatrist had any connection with espionage, and Senator Talmadge denied any inherent right to enter a home without a warrant.
Well, you remember when we were in law school, we studied a famous principle of law that came from England, and also is well known in this country, that no matter how humble a man's cottage is, that even the King of England can't enter without his consent?
I'm afraid that's been considerably eroded over the years, hasn't it?
Down in my country, we still think it's a pretty legitimate principle of law.
Ehrlichman denied he had burglary in mind in authorizing a covert operation, and Senator Talmadge, noting that under the inherent power doctrine, presidential authorization would be needed, asked whether Mr. Nixon, in fact, did personally authorize it.
On the 24th of July, I sat in a meeting where the president gave Mr. Krogh his charter, his instructions. I must say that the president put it to Mr. Krogh very strong, that he wanted Mr. Krogh and the people in this unit to take such steps as were necessary. And I can recall in that conversation specific reference to the use of polygraphs and summary procedure for the discharge of federal employees who might have been involved in this episode.
Another issue was John Dean's charge that Ehrlichman had told Charles Colson that President Nixon approved an offer of executive clemency to Howard Hunt. Ehrlichman, suggesting that Dean was only trying to justify his own clemency negotiations with McCord, denied Dean's story.
You never took up this matter with President Nixon at any time.
I didn't have to. Because
Except in July.
I knew what the marching orders were from July, and I particularly knew because it was my strong feeling, which he ratified and adopted, that this was a closed subject, that we must never get near it, and that it would be the surest way of having the actions of these burglars imputed to the president for there to be any kind of entertainment of conversation, whether polite or otherwise.
And to put it bluntly, your testimony is that John Dean told an untruth.
Yes, sir.
Another Dean charge denied by Ehrlichman was that he asked Dean to deep six, throw into the river, files from Hunt's safe, and that he was responsible for getting acting FBI Director Patrick Gray to destroy the most sensitive documents. Ehrlichman said that the burning of the documents, which he heard about in a phone call from Gray, surprised him and Mr. Nixon.
That totally nonplussed me, and I said something rather confused and said goodbye and hung up and reported to the president that he had, in fact, just told me that he destroyed the documents. We talked about the implications of that, and I said, I don't think that I completely closed the door with Mr. Gray just now on whether or not I would back him up if he denied receiving the documents. So I placed a second call right then, and I said, Pat, I didn't respond clear enough to your suggestion, and I just want to tell you, as I have to tell you, that I would have no choice if I were asked but to say that I was present at the time the documents were delivered to you. And he said, I understand. I guess I'll have to do what I'll have to do, or words to that effect.
Senator Inouye asked Ehrlichman whether he realized that President Nixon's decision to withhold White House tapes of conversations created grounds to move for dismissal of indictments. Ehrlichman said that while in the White House, he had not been looking at the whole issue in that way.
You should decide to indict you for some crime, and as you've indicated that the tapes may well provide you with evidence that would prove your innocence, could you use this as a defense and have the case dismissed?
It's never occurred to me, Senator, and I wouldn't touch the question with a 10-foot pole, frankly, for fear I might somehow affect my rights or someone else's rights, and I think you would be sensitive to that. It is not something that has occurred to me, and I hasten to say it's not anything that I've talked to anyone in the White House about.
Ehrlichman admitted 2 talks with Matthew Byrne, the judge in the Ellsberg trial, about possible appointment as FBI director. He said he did not consider the action unethical, that Byrne appeared to be willing to have those discussions, and that the approach was made on presidential instructions.
I can assure you that there was no such motive in my thought at the time of this meeting. And I'm sure that is also true of the Attorney General, and I'm sure it's true of the President. We were trying to get the best man that we could to be director of the FBI, and that was the sole and singular motive.
After hearing from Ehrlichman that he did not consider he had resigned under a cloud or that he was fired, Senator Inouye was picked up by the microphone making an offstage comment.
What a liar.
Inouye later said, well, I guess I must have been speaking of myself. Ehrlichman will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow also the subpoena deadline for the White House tapes expires. Senator Ervin says he'll move for a quick court order. Daniel Shaw, CBS News, Washington.
Morning, neighbor. Join us for breakfast?
Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Start right with Total.
Start eating right and watching your weight with Total. Each delicious ounce gives you 100% of the minimum daily adult requirement of vitamins and iron.
Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Start right with Total.
My new car, a Datsun 610, the most luxurious Datsun of all, with reclining bucket seats, electric rear window defogger, full carpeting, tinted glass, and all that sort of thing. It is, as you can see, a luxury car. But there are a lot of luxury cars on the market. I chose the Datsun 610 because it is a luxury economy car that gets around 25 miles to the gallon.
After all, I have a rather long drive each day.
President Nixon is expected to respond tomorrow morning to the subpoena served on him by the Watergate Committee and Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. Both are seeking White House documents and tape recordings. The White House has said the response will be consistent with the president's past refusal to turn over the material. Dan Rather has a report.
What few indications that are available point to the president's lawyers trying to have the subpoenas quashed, that is, thrown out by a court. All White House aides will say, for the record, is that that is one possible action. They say the president has under consideration others. No one will list them. Mr. Nixon met this morning for almost 2 hours with Republican congressional leaders talking about legislation. Watergate was not even discussed. The president offered no comments. The Republican leaders did not raise the issue. Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott, in answer to questions from reporters, repeated assurances that the president has nothing to hide.
It would be very hard to sort the tapes out. Moreover, impressions are sought to be given that there is no way of telling whether the tapes are themselves accurate or not, so that the president has made his own decision on that, and now it is a matter for the courts, and as a lawyer, I think I'd rather leave it to the courts.
The president today officially announced the resignation of John Connolly as a special consultant. Melvin Laird, who has been having some of Connolly's problems of getting his advice on Watergate accepted by the president, has decided to remain on at least a while longer. Laird has scheduled a news conference for tomorrow, apparently to announce that and to try to smooth over his difficulties with News Secretary Ronald Ziegler, whom Laird has unsuccessfully sought to have replaced. Dan Rather, CBS News, the White House.
The House Appropriations Committee today killed a $1.5 million White House Special Projects Fund because the administration refused to say whether the Watergate burglars had been paid out of it. The fund has been approved routinely for years. Frederick Malik of the Office of Management and Budget said earlier he didn't want to answer questions about the burglary because it's being investigated by the Senate Watergate Committee. For the first time, a federal judge has ruled U.S. combat operations in Cambodia, including the bombing, are unlawful because they were not authorized by Congress. In making the ruling, Judge Orrin Judd of Brooklyn granted an injunction against further military activity in Cambodia effective 4 o'clock Friday. Late today, however, the government filed an appeal, so it could be that the appellate court will not have time to act before the August 15th deadline, when all U.S. involvement in Indochina is scheduled to end. The suit had been brought by Democratic Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman of New York and 3 American flyers based in Guam. While the secret U.S. bombing of Cambodia was still underway in 1970, Secretary of State Rogers told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee the U.S. was not violating Cambodia's neutrality. In passing, however, he did mention that U.S. planes were bombing Cambodia. We have reports from Bob Schieffer and Marvin Cow.
The State Department says Rogers twice told the committee about the bombing. However, on Capitol Hill today, the secretary refused to discuss it.
We're in a rush right now.
Rogers left the public explanation of his meetings with the committee to his spokesman, Charles Bray.
On the 27th of April in 1970, the secretary referred again in his session with the committee to the fact that the United States was bombing the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong bases, that we were bombing those in the sanctuaries in Cambodia, and that we were bombing to the extent we could where there were no civilians involved.
As Bray spoke, Fulbright was attending a committee hearing on troop cuts in Europe. He left for a moment to issue this flat denial.
In the course of one of those hearings, I recall, he made positive statements that in regard to Cambodia, our hearts were clean and our hands were pure, or vice versa. But no, he gave no indication we were bombing.
Majority Leader Mansfield disputes another State Department story that Cambodian leader Sihanouk told him that he approved of the bombing.
I do not recollect such a statement. I do recall in Phnom Penh at that time, this was August 69, seeing a remnant of an American plane which had been downed. It was encased in a sort of a monument fashion. The numbers of the plane were there, but to the best of my knowledge, Sihanouk never mentioned that.
Mansfield and not Henry Kissinger may soon become the key American intermediary to Prince Sihanouk when he visits China next month. That's a private White House hope. Mansfield, an old friend of the prince, said tonight he'd do anything he could to bring peace to Cambodia. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, Washington.
General John Ryan was the second-ranking officer of the entire Air Force when the raids were ordered, but he told the Armed Services Committee today he didn't learn of the secret campaign until he was promoted to the top job. Even so, he was one up on the top civilian, Air Force Secretary Robert Seamans, who claims he never found out.
On this matter of the bombing in Cambodia, it was considered sufficiently sensitive that I was not privy to the information at the time it was going on, nor at the time that I submitted the reports to the Congress. The reports that I submitted were from the database handled by and carried by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I transmitted the official records that we had in the Pentagon to the committee at that time.
I think it's almost unbelievable. I'm astounded that the Secretary of the Air Force was bypassed. He didn't know anything about the operation. I think it's a flaw in the structure of civilian control of the military. Even though the Secretary of Defense did know not to take in the secretaries of the various services.
Yesterday, Defense Secretary Schlesinger said false bombing reports went to Congress because of a bureaucratic glitch, but Hughes won't accept that. Today, Schlesinger told visiting students the controversy has been magnified because of Watergate.
I think it's very important in the climate, this climate of suspicion, suspicion perhaps understandable, the poisonous atmosphere in which we are presently existing, that all of us retain a sense of perspective and a sense of discrimination if it is regarded by any one of you that these strikes were unwise. That is a judgment that you as a citizen can reach.
The investigation continues Monday when the senators call in Admiral Thomas Moore, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the former chairman, retired General Earl Wheeler. All of the questioning so far has been done in private, but the senators are far from satisfied with the answers they've received, and they are now toying with the possibility of open hearings, similar in format to those being conducted by the Watergate investigators. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Despite heavy U.S. airstrikes, the Cambodian war today closed in on Phnom Penh. For the first time this year, communist artillery struck the suburbs of the capital. A refugee camp near the airport was hit, so was a military housing project near the headquarters of Radio Phnom Penh. 30 or more people were hurt, and one report said 4 were killed.
We Americans love coffee, but coffee can be bitter. Bitter, bitter, bitter. You could even see a bitter cup of coffee on a man's face. To take some of the bitterness out of your life, switch to Sanka brand decaffeinated coffee. When we take out the caffeine, we also take out a lot of the bitterness, leaving just a good, smooth-tasting cup of real coffee. Sanka decaffeinated coffee. If it's less bitter, it's better.
We'd like to introduce a fantastic food product. The problem is we can't figure out a name. Somebody suggested Vitamo because it contains more than half the vitamin C you need daily. Another was Slimo because an average serving has only about 90 calories. And then Kiddo because almost all kids like it. But we can't agree, so we'll just introduce it with the same name it's always had. Introducing the potato, something good that's good for you.
Many shoppers this week are finding that one of the immediate effects of Phase 4 is price increases on food. To beat the high prices, the shoppers are looking for bargains, and a good place to find bargains is the wholesale market. David Henderson reports on one in New York City.
We got shell steaks here. We got shell steaks, we got ribeye steaks, we got 3-pound ribeye steaks.
It may look like a Saturday bargain basement sale, but it's a wholesale food warehouse in Queens, New York that's open to the public. Prices are so far below retail supermarkets that thousands of people are coming here each day to stock up.
I just picked up 2 packages of frankfurters for 93 cents. I paid as much as $1.29 for them in the supermarket.
What are some of the other bargains?
Shell steaks. I got 12 shell steaks for $11.95. It's unheard of, $1 a steak.
I got 5 children, so I got to save a buck where I can. So I figured I'd come here and look at it.
I think it's wonderful. Prices are cheap. Where are you going to go? These prices bargains.
This started 4 months ago. At night, the Zeitzer Food Corporation handles its usual business, deliveries to institutions, airlines, and hotels. Now, during the days when the warehouse used to stand idle, it's open, selling wholesale to consumers. Reuben Zeitzer says he's making a good profit while undercutting the supermarkets.
I watch my business. We know what we're doing. We know our markup is satisfactory. Now, if other people want to charge double or 40% or 30% higher, that's entirely their business.
Today, the food warehouse had 8,000 budget-wary customers. Some had to wait as long as 2 hours to get in. David Henderson, CBS News, New York.
After a 6-month decline, the stock market is in the midst of a rally. On the New York Stock Exchange today, the Dow Jones Industrials gained more than 14 points for their 8th straight advance. The volume was heavy, 22,200,000 shares. The average price per share gained 56 cents on the New York Exchange, 14 cents on the American.
I asked the gentleman, where can we go for a little peace and quiet? He says, Mr. Fields, I've got just the place. Peaceful little cottage nestled in the heart of the mellow mountain. My head, my stomach, I need some Alka-Seltzer.
When you have these upsets, Alka-Seltzer will neutralize the acid in your stomach and relieve your headache, too.
Alka-Seltzer, it's the greatest.
You might have noticed people who shower with Lifebuoy have a certain advantage. Lifebuoy's deodorant protection never lets them down. So why let yourself in for a letdown? Or maybe even a put down? Clean up with Lifebuoy. Lifebuoy gives you a fresh, lively kind of clean, so lastingly active, its deodorant protection won't let you down.
In Benghazi today, Libyan authorities questioned 4 men who hijacked a Japan Airlines jumbo jet last week, then blew it up yesterday. Libya indicated the 4 will be tried. Bert Quint has a report on the end of the hijacking.
The final journey of the jumbo jet that Japan Airlines called Flight 484 and its hijackers dubbed the Mount Carmel ended here at the Benghazi airport in Libya. Its death as seemingly senseless as the long voyage that took it from Amsterdam to the Persian Gulf to North Africa. As the plane landed here, the passengers, released by the hijackers, rushed from the plane through emergency chutes. As they raced to safety, the hijackers set off grenades. They left behind them the body of an accomplice, a woman who died early in the adventure when a hand grenade strapped to her exploded in the plane. They also left a mystery. Who are they really? What did they want?
They fought for Palestine, and they wanted to show the world once more that we have to count on them as long as Israel occupies the land of the Palestinians, and as long as the United States and Germany and Imperial Japan, as they called it, were helping the cause of the Israelis.
The passengers, relaxing at a Benghazi hotel as they waited for the airport runway to be repaired so that big planes can come in to take them from here, could only speculate. Whatever the political implications of the hijacking, Libya, an outspoken friend of the Palestinian movement, apparently wishes it hadn't ended here. The government is taking pains to explain that it only let the plane land because it was running out of fuel. Bert Quint, CBS News, Benghazi, Libya.
In Miami, the reputed underworld figure Meyer Lansky today was found innocent of income tax evasion charges by a federal court jury. The Senate Judiciary Committee has set up a special 9-member panel to keep tabs on the FBI. Chairman Eastland named himself to head the new subcommittee on FBI oversight. Among those assigned to it are Sam Ervin and Edward Gurney.
We've got so much to be thankful for. Because we got our health. When you got your health, you've got just about everything. Of course, it helps to work at it. We eat good food, and heaven knows we get enough exercise. We take Geritol every day. With Geritol, we're sure we're getting enough iron and a bunch of good vitamins. No, we don't have a barrel of money. But we got something money can't buy. Because when you got your health, you got just about everything.
Geritol, every day.
Do I look like a sourpuss? Well, that's what my grandchildren called me the last time they were here. And I'm afraid they were right. You know how it is when you're irregular. I tried all kinds of laxatives, always hoping to find one that was both gentle and effective. Then I found Ceratane. Ceratane's made from natural ingredients, so it's really gentle. And does Ceratane really work? Well, they're not going to call me sourpuss anymore.
Half a century ago, when William S. Hart was the Western hero, celluloid cowboys and grease-paint Indians shot it out in the backlots of Hollywood studios. Now, 50 years later, not a great deal has changed. Westerns are being filmed on the outskirts of Paris with Italian cowboys and Vietnamese Indians. Peter Kalischer reports.
Would you believe Custer's last stand, the 7th Cav and Indians, within 20 miles of Paris? Well, the movie's in production here now with a cast of hundreds. Marcello Mastroianni is George Armstrong Custer, known as Yellowhair to the Sioux Indians, who must have been colorblind. His close friend, according to the script, is Buffalo Bill, played by a Frenchman, Michel Piccoli. And Catherine Deneuve is Custer's secret flame, a French nurse history somehow overlooked. The real star and author of Custer is director Marco Ferreri, who conceived of shooting his version of the Battle of the Little Bighorn and events leading up to it in and around Paris. It's a sort of spaghetti western with French fries. Ferreri allows visitors on the set and directs with that icy, unflappable calm for which Italian movie makers are noted. Here in a stone quarry 20 miles west of Paris, the 7th Cav forms up for the impending showdown with Sitting Bull's Braves. At about this time, Buffalo Bill rides in, suffering from an old wound or a bad liver. The story doesn't make clear. To die and so close to victory, he groans, toppling from the saddle into the arms of Catherine Deneuve and friend, whose ministrations save him for a future career as a Wild West showman. Ferreri recruited his 7th Cavalrymen from among Italians, Frenchmen, and Americans who can ride. The Indians are nearly all Vietnamese residents of France who get a big kick out of playing 19th century Viet Cong. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, Taureau Assis and Cheval Fou in French, are played by Frenchmen. A bugler sounds the charge, and the Battle of the Little Bighorn begins. The Viet Cong know the Indians spring their ambush from behind a gravel ravine. The real casualties in this scene are 2 broken arms, 2 broken legs, and a fractured skull. The final last stand massacre will be shot another day. Meanwhile, Catherine Deneuve gets it in the neck with an arrow. And dies, wrapped in the American flag, at the feet of Custer's not-so-true Indian scout, Mitch. Mitch registers surprise at the sudden appearance overhead of a U.S. government observation balloon with a representative of the Indian Affairs Bureau on board, who surveys the battlefield. Properly employed, the balloon might have meant victory for Custer, not Sitting Bull. But it's too late at this point in time for a congressional investigation. Peter Kalischer, CBS News, Little Bighorn, France.
That's the news this Wednesday night. I'm Roger Mudd, CBS News. Good night.
Your indigestion and heartburn can come from two stomach problems, but most antacids treat only one, excess acid. But Digel relieves both problems, excess acid plus trapped gas, because many doctors agree a real cause of common stomach distress is trapped gas bubbles churning with excess acid. And Digel's unique formula has patented simethicone to eliminate distressing gas while powerful antacids neutralize excess acid. Digel. It's two kinds of medicine for two kinds of relief.
Does the Heart's 90-day collar really work?
I suffered with itchy fleas for years, but with my Heart's 90-day collar, I've had nothing but blessed relief.
I had itchy fleas in these hard-to-scratch places, but the Heart's 90-day collar is specially treated to kill fleas wherever they hide.
Does it work for cats, too?
The Heart's 90-day collar works for 3 full months. Now, that's real protection against itchy fleas.
Millions of satisfied dogs and cats agree. The Heart's 90-day collar really works.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Roger Mudd substituting for Walter Cronkite. Highlights of the Senate Watergate hearings will be featured by CBS News in a special broadcast tomorrow night at 10, 9 Central Time on CBS.
Are you sure you're good at this?
I'm real good at this. All right, don't mix me up.
Maybe we should go play darts. Aww. I'm really glad we came.
Yeah, me too. How about dinner? Yeah, I did, because you were playing.
No. Hey, look, they're dancing.
Oh,
Come on.
I don't want to miss the show.
Magic Mountain proudly presents one of
Sure, Magic Mountain's got top entertainment and lots more. It's got wild new excitement for everyone. Come on up to Magic Mountain.
Diet 7-Up, a little sugar for delicious flavor. Merely 1/3 the calories of your typical soft drink.
Newsroom with Joe Benty at 11.
A lovely lady. Beautiful. Out of sight. Miss Debbie Reynolds.
And welcome to the wacky world of Jonathan Winters, a world of wild imagination and inventiveness. Jonathan's greatest gift is his ability to create on the spot. Give him an old telephone or an umbrella, and one of his wonderful characters comes to life. This is Jonathan's attic, and it's filled with a lot of unusual things. About the only thing you won't find here is a script or a...
I'm going to make another request to the audience, that the audience refrain from expressing in any manner approval or disapproval of any person or any question or any answer. We are trying to conduct a dignified hearing, which will be as fair as possible to everybody concerned. And the committee is going to have to give serious consideration to the question of excluding from the hearing room persons who audibly express their approval or disapproval of any person or any question or any answer in an audible manner. And I hope that I will not have to repeat this request again. The committee has received, at least I have received as chairman of the committee, a letter from the White House dated July the 25th, 1973. Dear Mr. Chairman, White House counsel have received on my behalf the 2 subpoenas issued by you on behalf of the Select Committee on July the 23rd. One of these calls on me to furnish to the Select Committee recordings of 5 meetings between Mr. John Dean and myself. For the reasons stated to you in my letters of July the 6th and July the 23rd, I must respectfully refuse to produce these recordings. The other subpoena calls on me to furnish all records of any kind relating directly or indirectly to the activities, participation, responsibilities, or involvement of 25 named individuals in any alleged criminal acts related to the presidential election of 1972. Some of the records that might arguably fit within that subpoena are presidential papers that must be kept confidential for reasons stated in my letter of July the 6th. It is quite possible that there are other records in my custody that would be within the ambit of that subpoena, and that I could, consistent with the public interest and my constitutional responsibilities, provide to the Select Committee. All specific requests from the Select Committee will be carefully considered, and my staff and I, as we have done in the past, will cooperate with the Select Committee by making available any information and documents that can appropriately be produced. You will understand, however, I am sure that it would simply not be feasible for my staff and me to review thousands of documents to decide which do and which do not fit within the sweeping but vague terms of the subpoena. It continues to be true, as it was when I wrote you on July the 6th, that my staff is under instructions to cooperate fully with yours in furnishing information pertinent to your inquiry. I have directed that executive privilege not be invoked with regard to testimony by present and former members of my staff concerning possible criminal conduct or discussions of possible criminal conduct. I have waived the attorney-client privilege with regard to my former counsel. In my July 6th letter, I described these acts of cooperation with the Select Committee as genuine, extensive, and in the history of such matters, extraordinary. That cooperation has continued and will continue. Executive privilege is being invoked not only with regard to documents and recordings that cannot be made public, consistent with the confidentiality essential to the function of the office of the President. I cannot and will not consent to giving any investigatory body private presidential papers. To the extent that I have custody of other documents or information relevant to the work of the Select Committee, and that can properly be made public, I will be glad to make these available in response to specific requests. Sincerely, Richard Nixon. Now, how the President expects this committee to specify each document that he says falls within the ambit of one of these subpoenas is a very surprising thing. We are not clairvoyant. Since we have never seen the documents, and since even those the White House aides who are willing to identify the documents are not allowed to copy them or any parts of them, the President puts on the committee a manifest impossibility of receiving the documents. The way the chair construes this letter, the President flatly refuses to give us the tapes that were identified in the subpoena as recording conversations between the President and John Dean. And he lays down the second conditions about the documents which are impossible of fulfillment by the committee, because you can't identify a document which you've never seen. And you have the restriction upon the White House former aides, or aides of former aides that could go through these papers and identify this document, that they can't copy them, much less carry them out. So the chair finds it a little difficult to see where very much cooperation comes from the President in these matters. This is a serious affair that the committee is engaged in, and here's the President of the United States has informed us that some of these recordings do have reference to the matters we're investigating. But he can't furnish us to us because we might misconstrue them. And then he tells us he'll furnish us documents that he doesn't consider to be presidential papers. If we can identify the specific document, which is an impossibility. I'd just like to say I think the President could reply with a request to the committee in both of these respects, and the Constitution wouldn't collapse and the heavens wouldn't fall. But the committee might be aided by the president in determining the truth of the involved. Senator Baker.
Mr. Chairman, as those of us who are lawyers, and that's meant to be a term of approval rather than disapproval, for those of us who are lawyers, I think the best way to summarize the present situation is to say, thus the issue was joined. It is important to note that this committee caused 2 subpoenas to issue rather than 1. The first subpoena specified with, I believe, great particularity the conversations, the dates, and the participants that we wanted access to on the allegation of the subpoena that such conversations might be concerned with alleged illegal or criminal activity. The second subpoena dealt with a rather more general demand for documents. I'm pleased, Mr. Chairman, that we chose to issue our subpoena in 2 parts rather than 1, because, as you've pointed out, it's far more difficult to specify with particularity the documents we seek if we don't know what the documents are. But it's fairly easy to specify the tapes or the portions of the tapes that we seek. In any event, we've arrived at the place now where it would appear that the issues are in fact joined. And the third branch of the government now, the judiciary, may in fact be called on to resolve an historic conflict between the remaining 2 branches. I think, as in all litigation in this country, it is our desire, all of us, to proceed, if we choose to proceed, to permit the court to make a calm, intellectually and judicially sound judgment on the appropriateness of the request of this committee, together with all of the several fundamental and significant constitutional questions that are presented. I have only one remaining comment, Mr. Chairman. Notwithstanding that the issues are joined, I would still hope that there is some way to ameliorate the situation. There have been a number of suggestions in the past. I've made many suggestions, both publicly and in the privacy of our executive proceedings. Certain suggestions have been passed on, both formally and informally. But notwithstanding that we have reached the point where the issues are joined and litigation may in fact ensue, I would still hope we can find a way to permit this committee to have access to the relevant portions of the testimony or of the evidence that we require quickly and speedily and without a prejudicial effect on our mandate to investigate nor on the appropriate functioning of the presidency as an institution. I've suggested, for instance, that an informal panel of distinguished Americans not now holding a position in government might review these tapes at the request of both the executive and the legislative departments and recommend to both the President and the Congress what portions are relevant and what portions are not relevant. I'm prepared to go even further, Mr. Chairman, and I've not discussed this with you or my colleagues on the committee, and say that it's an extension and elaboration of that suggestion. I would be willing to have 1 or 2 or 3 or a small group of distinguished non-governmental officials review the tapes and the documents and recommend to the President and to the Congress that certain documents or tapes are or are not relevant to this inquiry. And if they're so intermixed with other conversation, or if they lend themselves to more than one interpretation, that such a panel give to us a finding of the net effect of that information. That may not end the controversy. It may be necessary for the committee then to pursue the matter further. It may be necessary for the president to disagree, but at least it would move us one space forward. It is not idle optimism that compels me to once again urge that we find a way around this joinder of issue for the benefit of the Congress, of the presidency, of the president, for the benefit of the courts, that they may be spared the business of defining 200 years after the drafting of the charter document implied, explicit, and overlapping apparent powers, and for the people of the country. So no matter how small the flicker of the flame of optimism may be, I continue to urge that we have an accommodating spirit and that we continue to try to find a way, in this way or any other way that seems promising of a result, to produce that desired end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other member of the committee have any observations they'd like to make at this time? Then if not, it'd be my purpose to call a meeting of the committee at an early time and let the committee decide what action it shall take. There is a